Howdy everyone, and today I'll be reviewing the living daylights out of an ultra-wide-angle zoom lens for APS-C cameras, the Tokina 12-28mm f4 ATX Pro. It retails for £350 or about $450 US, about average for an ultra-wide-angle lens on APS-C. The zoom range of this particular lens is quite interesting to me. Most kit lenses that come with a new camera start at 18mm at the wide angle end. This Tokina lens goes out as wide as 12mm, an ultra wide angle, the full frame equivalent of about 19mm. Most ultra wide lenses on APS-C can go even wider than this, down to 10mm, but the party trick of this Tokina lens is that it can zoom all the way in to 28mm. That's a pretty good zoom range. The idea is that this could be a bit of a general purpose zoom lens, but for wide angle enthusiasts like me. Not a bad idea in principle, although I think most people would still prefer to have a separate ultra wide angle lens to add to their kit, which can go as wide as 10mm. Still, the Tokina lens offers a unique zoom range. The lens will also fit onto a full frame camera, where at 12mm of course you'll get extreme vignetting, but you can zoom in to get full coverage at 19mm, still a very nice ultra wide angle. And of course you can zoom all the way into 28mm too. So on full frame this is a workable 19 to 28mm lens. The maximum aperture of f4 means that this lens lets in just an average amount of light. Let's take a look at the build quality. The lens is fairly big and a little heavy. The body is encased in quite tough plastic, so it should survive heavy usage. The metal lens mount has a weather sealing gasket for better protection against dust and moisture. The lens's zoom ring is a little heavy to turn, but it is fairly smooth. The focus mechanism is what we've grown used to from a Tokina lens. When the focus ring is pulled down, you can manually focus the lens very smoothly and quite precisely. For autofocus, you push the focus ring upward and it clunks into place, and now the focus ring is disconnected from the mechanism. Pulling the focus ring back down again is pretty awkward. The gears don't often align well and your focus setting will be changed. It's a very old-fashioned system. The autofocus motor is pretty quick. It's quieter than normal for a Tokina lens, but it still makes quite an audible buzzing whoosh sound. In use, for me, the autofocus system was not very accurate either. It would miss my subject quite often, leaving slightly soft images. Overall, the build quality is 100% typical for a Tokina lens. Quite tough, but with a hideously dated focus system. Come on, it's 2016. Well, let's move on and look at picture quality. First, I'll be testing this lens on a 24MP APS-C camera, my little Canon EOS M3, with an adapter. At 12mm and f4, the lens is very nice and sharp in the middle of the image. And in the corners? Uh-oh, what a disaster. The corners are soft, and the chromatic aberration is so bad that it looks like one of those 3D anaglyph images from the 50s. Ouch. There's more sharpness when you stop down to f8 or f11, but that crazy colour fringing remains. I'd heard this lens had issues like this. On a 24MP camera, clearly they're badly magnified. Well, let's zoom in halfway to 20mm. At f4, the image is just a touch soft in the middle, and in the corners it's worse, with very noticeable ghosting. The colour fringing is significantly reduced though, thankfully. Stop down to f5.6 or f8 for improvements, where we now see just about acceptable image quality, better than at 12mm. And let's zoom all the way in now to 28mm. At f4, the lens is slightly soft again in the middle, and the corners are very weak. At f5.6, at f8, and then at f11, There are improvements, bringing about a reasonably sharp picture, although it's never particularly impressive. So, on an APS-C camera, for which the lens is really designed, the Tokina lens unfortunately fails, struggling with soft corners and little chromatic aberration demons, presumably the same ones that torment most of Tokina's lenses. Well, let's quickly see how this lens could perform on full frame, just out of interest. Here it is on a 20 megapixel Canon 6D at 19mm, the widest angle that can give full coverage. At f4, the lens is fantastically sharp in the middle with good contrast. Over in the corners, sharpness is acceptable, although we're still catching some chromatic aberration. Stop down to f5.6 for noticeably more sharpness. The lens stays this sharp all the way down to f16. And even f22 is reasonably sharp. So on a full frame camera, the lens performs a lot better, although the eagle-eyed will still notice some chromatic aberration, unfortunately. Let's move on from all that and look at distortion and vignetting. Firstly, on an APS-C camera, we see an average level of barrel distortion at 12mm, but even at f4, almost no vignetting. Zoom in to 18mm and the distortion is all gone. And even at 28mm, there's no noticeable vignetting. Brightness is even across the frame, so that at least is pretty impressive. If you're using a full frame camera, then at 19mm, you'll also see some barrel distortion towards the edges. You'll get more vignetting at f4 now, so stop down to f5.6 for slightly brighter corners on full frame. The lens can focus down to about 24cm from your subject, quite close really. Unfortunately, picture quality at close distances is alarmingly soft, as you can see here. Stop down to f5.6 for a little improvement, and to f8 for good sharpness. How well can this wide-angle lens work against the bright light that may often come into your frame? It's another black mark here, lots of flaring and a big drop in contrast. And finally, bokeh. A slightly irrelevant question, as it's not very easy to get out of focus backgrounds with a wide-angle f4 lens on an APS-C camera. The quality of those out of focus backgrounds, when you can get them, is generally quite busy and a bit ugly. So overall, the Tokina 12 to 28mm f4 is a lens with an interesting zoom range, accompanied by a real witch's brew of image quality issues. It's possible to get acceptably sharp images if you stop down the lens's aperture enough, and the lens has little vignetting or distortion. But soft corners and an inaccurate and clunky autofocus system combine to frustrate and disappoint, and among other problems, the level of chromatic aberration this lens displays is totally unacceptable for any modern camera lens. So ultimately, I would heartily not recommend buying this ultra-wide-angle lens for your APS-C camera. Take a look at my ultra-wide-angle lens comparison video though for some better ideas instead.